Okay. Hello.
Hello.
So we're going to talk about Pink Floyd.
Again, aren't we? We're here again.
I've been seeing you. Hello. Look, I've got my Pink Floyd background today. Look.
So I thought for this one we were gonna you were gonna listen to every Yes album.
No.
And then we talk about what your favourites were.
I think I did listen to one about 8 years ago. I think I have listened to it, and I've got the greatest hits compilation, and I've listened to that for you. I like it when they get going around sort of Own of a Lonely Heart, when they sort of wake up. I like that stuff. I like Roundabout. I like All Good People. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I like all those bits. It's just when they're a bit,
No, we've got to get a reaction video of you listening to Tales from Topographic Oceans. That's the one.
Never listened. I'm not going to listen to that. I listened to it around your house together.
I'm going to work on you.
I'll do that. I'm not doing it. I can't do it on my own. I'll cry. Life's been difficult enough the last few years anyway, let alone bloody.
That would probably get like loads. It would probably go viral.
It'd be the biggest.
Watch Matt Stevens cry.
Crying to a Yes song. I just can't listen. Just can't listen to it anymore. But I mean, it's not that I dislike it. I just genuinely never heard it, and I've never been inspired to listen to it. I do like the singles though. Right. Okay. So, top 5 Pink Floyd albums, David.
Yes, indeed.
So, should we start off chronologically?
We did. I mean, we agreed on these actually straight away, didn't we? This was.
Yeah, it's pretty much a straight run of records, isn't it? So, we'll do them chronologically. So, should we start with the first one? So we'll start with so pre to this, I like bits of I like Interstellar Overdrive, I like Astronomy Domain, I like bits of the previous albums. Atom Heart Mother's got what's that good? There's 2 good ones on there, but the main track goes on a bit, doesn't it?
It's a bit patchy. There are some good ideas, but as you say, it goes on.
Fat Old Son's good, don't it?
Fat Old Son's good. I quite like If as well. That's quite nice.
Those 2 are good. But there's a lot of.
It also contains Arthur's psychedelic, Alan's psychedelic breakfast,
which is probably fun at the time, wasn't it?
The reason that name sticks in my band, the first rock band I played in was called Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast.
Was it?
It was.
Oh, that's cool. You got any tapes?
We didn't do anything for. Oh God, no.
That would have been a bit.
This was before you had recording, Matt. This is years ago.
Yeah, that would have been perfect. Have you got any recordings of your early solo work?
Yes. I made a solo album in 1983 or
Is it going to be reissued?
No.
I think he should.
I might have to re-record it because.
Well, I keep telling you to do that. Right. Okay. So, Meadow.
Yes, Meadow's an interesting record because it really is a game of 2 halves, isn't it?
Mm.
The reason I chose Meadow was predominantly side 2 of the vinyl, which is the long track Echoes, which is an absolute masterpiece.
It's brilliant, yeah.
And I feel that in that they sort of refined all of the good stuff they produced in the 2 or 3 albums preceding that into a really compelling and great piece of music. Right from the sort of the little ping at the start of it on the piano, all the way through, and it really does take you on a journey. Does that track?
Yeah, it's
mad. And I like One of These Days as well. I think that's good. The riff, and a little bit more of the riff. Lots of bass guitar going on there. Echoey
bass theme. It always reminds me of the Doctor Who theme. One of these days.
Yes. Actually, it is very like the Doctor Who. In fact, if you listen to the live version of One of These Days on Pulse, the Floyd album, the live recording of their sort of 90s lineup, he actually plays a little bit of Doctor Who in the middle of it.
I think it's definitely got that feel to it, hasn't it?
Very cheeky, yeah.
But
the rest of the tracks, to be honest, I mean, I can kind of take them or leave them alone if I'm honest.
Its Echoes is very much, what they developed over the course of the next 4 albums is very much Echoes. Has got all those bits in it, hasn't it? All those.
Yeah, it's got the ideas in there.
The lush harmonies, the moving through different sounds. Gilmour's beautiful guitar playing. It's very much, you know, it's got all those bits in there, hasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, excuse me. You probably heard a loud bing there. I just want to see what that was.
Was that your? Was that your?
Probably need to turn it off.
Yeah, I've just. I had one on my computer. I've just switched you off, David.
Okay, I'm just going to turn all these various bits and pieces off.
Switch off your bings. I've switched off my bings.
This is what you're seeing it live, folks. This is, you know, technology.
I can always do an edit. I can do a little edit.
Getting the better of us. Anyway, there we go. So
right, okay.
Yeah. Metal, yeah, brilliant. And I still listen to Echoes even now.
Yeah, I listen. It's definitely in the one. If I'm going to listen to a Floyd album, it's definitely in the first few I pick up. I remember I did a bit of guitar on. Cripple Black Phoenix did a version of Echoes. And I played some guitar on one version they did of it. I don't think it was ever released.
Nice.
And I did this sort of really jazzy thing, which is probably quite inappropriate, actually. Looking back on it now, which is probably why it never came out.
Well, there you go.
It was quite sort of, you know, perhaps Pink Floyd weren't really going for Joe Pass when they did it. but I was.
Well, there's nothing wrong with mixing it up a little bit and kind of, you know.
I'm not sure it really worked, to be honest, but I don't think it was released anyway, so not to my knowledge. Okay, so the next one is Obscured by Clouds.
Which is, of course, a film soundtrack.
Yeah, and that's very much in the journey to Dark Side, isn't it, really? Yes. You can hear that sound coming through, can't you?
It's a songs album. And well, there are some instrumental pieces on it, but for me, I think on that one's actually the songs that kind of shine through. I think they're really good, even if the lyrics are sometimes a little bit kind of.
I suppose it was done very quickly, apparently.
It was because they were. I think basically they were on a fixed fee probably to do this soundtrack. They wanted to get it done as rapidly as they could.
But there's a beautiful feeling to the whole album. It's got a lovely sort of vibe to it, hasn't it?
It has. Yeah, that's an album I can listen to sort of if I'm kind of chilling out.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these albums as well, they're quite comfort records to me.
Yes.
Especially, I mean,
but maybe not the last one we're going to talk about. But.
No, well, and the last one is the only one I discovered recently. So, So are we sort of done with Obscured by Clouds?
I think so, because it's
it's a transitional piece on a brilliant run.
It's transitional. It's a soundtrack. It's quite feel good in a way.
Yeah, it's lovely. So the big one next.
Yes, this is where the unrelenting misery starts.
Yeah. Well, Dark Side of the Moon is probably the most English rock album ever made, isn't it? It's kind of the English malaise is written big throughout it, isn't it? It's a terrible sadness of existence, and you know, commuting and life, and you know, But I remember there was a contemporary review of it where they said it was too reliant on sound effects, weren't it? I think it was or something.
I think that's perhaps because the use of those sound effects was a fairly new thing then. And it's one of the things about their albums is that they were very meticulous about the production and making sure that the albums sounded as good as possible. And the sound effects really come through on that one. And I think it was actually Nick Mason, the drummer, who was very sort of big in doing those. He used to go and do the field recordings, and a lot of the sound effects on Dark Side of the Moon and on other albums are his work.
I think those sound effects sort of bind the whole thing together, don't they?
Yes, it makes it into a sort of a continuous piece. Really, I mean, Dark Side is one of those albums which begs to be listened to straight through.
Oh, and one of the difficult things about like Dark Side as well, it's been so ripped off, and so many bands. Let's call them Porcupine P. Sort of took that sort of sound and created their own sort of version of it, didn't they? And sort of
I mean, he just desperately wanted to be Pink Floyd, I think.
But he's not the worst. Actually, those Porcupine Tree albums that sound like Floyd are brilliantly done, actually. But
again, you've got the same attention to detail there. Brilliantly recorded and produced, and they sound excellent. Those are records Dark Side of the Moon is a record, I think, which is often used by people to test their hi-fis.
Yeah, that was the thing, wasn't it? And then it was this album. Then it was what was the other word? Brothers in Arms by Dire Straits, wasn't it?
Straits, yeah, sort of a later example of later.
You can in the Live at Pompeii film. There's some footage of them recording it, isn't there?
Yes, yeah. Sort of, you see them messing around with the little VCS3 synthesizer and
so cool.
All that sort of stuff, and being very particular about the food they have in the canteen and so forth. Yeah,
I did read a book about it. Apparently, when they were making it, they were still doing gigs between the sessions. It wasn't like like now bands going in, they'd have to pop off and do a gig. You know what I mean? It's like,
and they were playing Dark Side of the Moon pretty much in its entirety while they were recording it. They premiered that material beforehand.
I mean, the bands would never do that now because it'd just get bootlegged straight away, wouldn't it? And be on YouTube by the next morning or even the same night, So
yeah,
and so it's the Pink Floyd album that everybody's got, isn't it? Really, it
is. It's I think by far their most famous one.
It's Trans Floyd album, isn't it?
Of the 5 that we've chosen, I'd say that's probably the one that I listen to least. But the reason for that might be that I played it to death when I first got it.
It's one of those records I can pretty much play through in my head without putting it onto play.
Exactly so.
It's like that one, Pet Sound, Sergeant Pepper's, Revolver, Napalm Death Scum. A lot of those records, I can just play those records. I don't know why Napalm Death Scum, because I listened to it a lot when I was a kid. All those sort of albums, I can just, in my head, I can listen to the Guns N' Roses Appetite for Destruction. I can listen to it in my head without having to put it on. So
yeah, with me, it's things like Tubular Bells and Close to the Edge. We were talking about earlier. Those sorts of things. Stuff you listen to in your sort of teens.
And it's like I can play all those, like those Iron Maiden records. I can play all the guitar solos and every part of it. And it's all lodged in there just because I listened to it so much. And I was never as big a fan as Dark Side as I was of Wish You Were Here. Was my favourite Floyd album when I was a kid.
What was your favourite? Was it
when I was a teenager through to my 20s? Wish You Were Here was definitely on it. So should we move on from Dark Side? Then I mean, it's one of those albums probably been spoken about so much. It's very hard to add anything else to it, really, isn't it? So
yes, I think so.
But it's still a wonderful, brilliant album.
It's a great album, and well worthy of the attention. If you happen to be, if dear watchers, you happen to be one of the 4 people left in the Western world who have not heard Dark Side of the Moon, it is worth a listen.
It's definitely worth listening. It's a magical album. There's a magical feeling to it. The guitar sounds, I'm particularly a fan of the Univibe guitar parts on it. No, it's a magical record, and it does live up to the hype, as they say.
It does.
So this was always my favourite Floyd album. The next one is Wish You Were Here. This was always my favourite because I love the synth sounds on it. I love Gilmour's phrasing. I think it's Dave Gilmour's best guitar, one of his best guitar albums. His guitar playing is just sublime on this. It's wonderful. The phrasing is brilliant.
I think the synth parts are probably the thing that did it for me. I particularly like that sort of in the sort of beginning and the end of Shine On You Crazy Diamond.
That's brilliant.
Rick Wright to me, he's the sort of heart and soul of Pink Floyd to me. I mean, he's not always the showiest player, but a lot of the melodic ideas were his apparently, and his keyboard playing is always on point. I mean, he's not a flashy player by any stretch of the imagination,
but the sounds are great, and I love his voice.
Yes, I love it.
He's live in Gdansk album, the Dave Gilmour live in Gdansk album.
Oh, I love that record.
So do I. Yeah, really underrated, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think that's better than the Floyd live albums from the 90s.
The version of Echoes on that is absolutely superb.
And you wouldn't expect it. You think, it's going to be a bit of a, Dave Gilmour, not 2006, or this could be a bit rocky. No, it's absolutely brilliant. It's a great record, that live in Gdansk.
It is really, really good. Great to watch as well, the DVD. Really good fun.
I met Rick Wright once in.
Oh, goodness.
in Harrods. When I worked in Harrods, I was serving, and he was looking for a 3 for $20 DVD combo, and he only could find 2 DVDs, and he had me looking at the back for another DVD.
Oh, there you go.
And he seemed to have been drinking, is all I could say.
He may have had a glass of wine, possibly.
He may have had a light sherry on the way in.
Yes,
but he seemed nice enough bloke. I didn't say anything bad about him.
Yes, I mean he had quite a hard time in the end, didn't he? Because he was effectively sacked.
It's there's a lot of footage of Floyd. It looks like sort of a sixth form common room where they've all just had a bit of a falling out.
Yes, and reading the biographies, they sound like actually fairly unpleasant people to a very large extent.
It's one of those things. They seem like those sort of guys, who are very posh and can't tell each other how they feel.
Yes, and they did all come from these sort of very solidly middle class backgrounds.
Yeah, and they start. There's a certain thing about some of those guys where they can't really, say, look, oh, sorry, mate, sorry, I got that wrong, or you know what I mean?
They can't do it.
No, there didn't seem to be any sort of way of backing down once they got to a certain point, which sort of emotionally seemed to really mess them up, and especially towards as they've got older as well, hasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Watching that Live 8 footage, which was just like
makes me cry. That video does.
It does, yeah. Anyway, there we are. Yes.
The video of when they do "Comfortably Numb" on going off on a tangent, but that doesn't matter. When they do "Comfortably Numb" on Gilmore does it with Waters at on that wall thing. That really moved me as well. There is a magic to those guys playing together. There's certain combinations of people. There's a magic. And it's real.
Again, a diversion. I saw Pink Floyd perform the Wall.
Wow.
In 1981. It was the second run of shows they did at Earl's Court. With the full show and building the wall and all that sort of stuff.
I'd love to have seen that.
And it was tremendous, actually. It was really, really good. Enjoyed that.
I think, even though The Wall's not my favourite Floyd album by a long, long way, I'd love to have seen that show.
Yeah, it was a spectacle.
Yeah, I was going to say
with the giant pig and all that sort of stuff. It was great.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. The first version of The Wall I saw was that one where it was like a karaoke version of the Berlin Wall.
Oh, that was bizarre.
Yeah,
they had all
the first time I saw that, then I saw the film, and I think then I heard the album.
Yeah, I heard the album. So the album was released when I was like 16, so I was totally in the zone at that time. It was perfect.
Prime Floyd. But
when I went on holiday with the school to Greece over the summer of 1980, and it was all over the radio in Greece. You could not get away from Pink Floyd.
That just blows my mind that could ever have been a thing.
Yeah.
All
over Greek radio.
I can't imagine that was ever a thing that you put on the radio and Pink Floyd would come on. I mean, you might get a bit of them on Radio 2 now.
Yes,
but really, you can't imagine that sort of music being popular, which obviously it's hugely popular, but not popular in the mainstream sense. So yeah,
that was a diversion. I mean, Wish You Were Here. That was. I think it was the first of the sort of the modern Floyd albums that I heard. And I sort of, what stood out in it for me when I first heard about it and saw it is the fact that Roy Harper does a guest vocal on it. And I was a big Roy Harper fan at the time.
Have a Cigar, yeah. I love that vocal. Yeah. And it sounds like a really good Roger vocal, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It sounds like Roger Waters. It sounds like Roger Waters, but in tune.
But in tune with a bit more power behind it, yeah.
Exactly.
And it certainly doesn't have it doesn't stick out as a different vocalist. I would imagine 99% of people listening to the album don't know it's somebody else.
No, you would have to look at the credits. And in fact, it doesn't even sound particularly like Roy Harper does on other records.
No,
so
it's a great lyric as well, isn't it? Lyrically, yes. I think this is a brilliant album.
Yeah, lyrically, he was sort of at his peak, really, with this and the next one.
Definitely.
Roger Waters, with Dark Side of the Moon, Roger Waters had taken over writing all the lyrics. Yeah.
Another weird thing about this record is they didn't tour it. There was never a Wish You Were Here tour. They moved. The next tour was the Animals tour.
Yes, it was. That was, although they were performing "Shine On You Crazy Diamond" before.
I think so. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and what they doing? They're doing that one, and they were doing.
They were doing prototypical versions of Dogs and Sheep.
That was it. Yeah. So because
you've got to be crazy. You've got to be crazy and raving and drooling.
They had both of them ready to record, and then they recorded "Wish You Were Here" first, and the Animals after.
Yes, that's it. That's it exactly.
Which is. I think that's genius. I think that's so clever. It's a clever way to do it. Just go, no, this is the material we have. This is what we're going to record this time, and then we're going to go out and do this one next. Which is,
of course, there's the old sort of very well rehearsed story about Syd Barrett, their original sort of lead vocalist and guitarist, turning up in the studio in a hell of a state because he was not a well man by that time.
There is a terrible sadness about this record, isn't there?
There is.
It's not a happy album, is it? By any means.
"Shine On You Crazy Diamond" is arguably about Syd Barrett. Yeah, interesting.
There's a real. I mean, there's a sadness about most of Floyd's work post Syd Barrett, and there's a kind of a sort of mourning a lost sort of mate. They lost their friend, didn't they? So, and there is terrible.
Interestingly, I mean, Syd Barrett was. So when I was at university, there was. Yeah, a lot of my hippie friends thought that Syd Barrett, they worshipped the ground he walked on. So the only Floyd album they would listen to was the first one, "Piper at the Gates of Dawn."
Yeah, I've got mates as well.
And they were big into Syd Barrett's solo albums, which are just piffle, quite frankly. I mean, not his fault because he was not well by that stage.
No, I've tried to listen to those Syd Barrett solo albums, and I have to say I don't really get it, but it probably means I'm wrong.
It's the sound of a man who is quite seriously mentally ill, being pushed by his record company into making an album.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, like I said, I haven't listened to them for a long time, so perhaps I'll have to listen to them again. But when I listened to, I wasn't a big fan. I do like the early Floyd singles. I think the singles are really cool, and I'd like him. And I like Astronomy to Me, and I like that sort of psychedelic feel of the early Floyd albums. But they're not the first ones I wish. If I'm going to listen to early Floyd, I'll listen to Bike or See Emily Play rather than the album.
The live component of Ummagumma, I like that. That's really good.
That's got a great version of Astronomy to Me now.
It has. It's probably the best version actually. It's sort of it's just really good space rock if you like that sort of thing.
Brilliant. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, no, it's great.
More like Hawkwind than anything else, to be honest.
It's very much divergent. So that the Floyd and Hawkwind sort of were the two big space rock bands, weren't they?
They were at that time.
So
Wish You Were Here. Great stuff.
Are we done for Wish You Were Here?
I think we probably are.
So yeah, that's probably. I mean, it was my favourite until very recently. I think talking to you got me into the next one. So we're on Animals now.
Yes.
I think you got me into. We talked about Animals, and I never really.
I can remember the conversation.
I think you got
it is my favourite Pink Floyd album, actually, by a country mile.
It's awesome. It's very different and very angry, and and like I say, Gilmour's probably his favourite player is on Wish You Were Here, but on Animals, his lead playing is really aggressive and like powerful.
Oh, it's superb. He's all over it. And
really cool.
Although it's often talked of as being really a Roger Waters album because he wrote pretty much all of the. He didn't write everything, but a lot of it was him. He was back to writing all the lyrics and so on. And I think the concept was Roger Waters. It is just a brilliant album for guitar playing.
Yeah.
There's the lead playing on Dogs, and then again that riff on Sheep, just absolutely superb. The one that Stephen Wilson used again and again and again.
Yeah. There's one on Time Flies. Not Time.
Yes.
There's one that's.
It is Time Flies. It's basically the riff from Sheep.
And I was like, hello, you can't do that. you can't just. I mean, talk about Stephen Wilson again, but The Sky Moves Sideways is probably his Floyd opus, isn't it? That he,
yes.
But Time Flies is a bit sort of like, well, that's just the same song.
When I heard it, I did actually burst out laughing.
Well, I'm a huge admirer of Stephen Wilson, hugely talented guy, but you can't do that. I mean,
no.
But yeah, so going back to Animals, so this one seems quite very different to Wish You Were Here. It's a lot angrier.
Yeah.
And considering they both sort of come from the same sort of era of the band, really, I mean, they're the sort of the A and B side of the same thing, aren't they? But all the sort of
they were just getting progressively more fed up with life, I suspect, even though they'd had all this success. I think they were finding it a bit like reading biographies and so on. I think they were finding that a bit of a trap.
Yeah, because it was like Wish You Were Here is really sort of sad, and Animals is really angry, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then Onto the Wall was just really bitter and nasty, isn't it?
The Wall is just
horrible,
basically unpleasant in all sorts of ways. But Animals is the peak for me. It's often
great.
It's not often considered in the same breath as Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here, but I think it's an excellent record, and it's concise. The songs are good. The playing, particularly Gilmour, again, just fantastic.
And then Rick Wright still brings back in some of those synth sounds he used in the previous album.
He does. So he's
go back to the those bits. You know what I mean? He's got those sort of
the last album where you really hear Rick Wright before the breakup, basically.
So there are top 5. So the controversy be why didn't you put The Wall in? Why?
Because it's awful.
Well, the thing is, The Wall's got some of the couple of Come From Me Numb is one of my favourite Floyd songs. It's brilliant, but I mean I can't listen to it. I think one of the problems I've got with The Wall is I listen to it, like I said before, via the that live concert in Germany.
But your first experiences of hearing The Wall were that Berlin.
So yeah, the first thing I heard was that Berlin thing, it was awful. It was just awful. And then the other thing I heard of the next time I've heard of Floyd was that they did that concert with it was really windy. What was it? One of the Nordhoff Robbins ones. It was outside, and it was Paul McCartney, Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd were rubbish on that, and the whole concert was awful. I mean, Nordhoff Robbins is one of my favourite charities. Don't get me wrong, but I'm a big fan. Yeah. But that concert was terrible. So when I was about 13, 14, I thought Pink Floyd and Roger Waters are both. There were this Pink Floyd with a band that came on between Dire Straits and Cliff Richard, so they were not a cool band to be into, Pink Floyd, and Roger Waters with this bloke who did these things with Cyndi Lauper, and he was this sort of with Van Morrison. He was just just a bit of a joke. So I never liked either Floyd or Roger Waters because of that, and it was like that was probably the worst. Not being disrespectful to Pink Floyd, but the 80s Floyd was probably their worst moment, wasn't it? Really, the 80s live.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is that The Wall. When it came out, I was big into it and listened to it loads. I can't listen to it now. I just think it's largely dreadful. I actually prefer the final cut to The Wall.
I've never made it all the way through that.
I think that's got some quite interesting moments. I don't listen to all of it, but there are some bits which are quite interesting and almost funny in a strange sort of way.
I think with The Wall, it's a bit showbiz, isn't it?
It's totally showbiz.
It makes me. I find it a bit embarrassing to listen to.
I mean, as evidenced by that, rather than just do a tour where they would play some songs from The Wall, they did The Wall. And that was all you got.
Though, as well. I think that's a fantastic idea. There's just something about the album. I don't know if it's the production or it's a spectacularly unhappy album, isn't it? They're all.
It is.
I mean, it was sad.
It was the first time for ages they'd used an external producer because Bob Ezrin got involved, sort of big name American producer.
Yeah, Alice Cooper.
And gave it this very sort of cinematic sound. So he had lots of strings. It was orchestrated quite heavily.
I love Bob Ezrin's productions and Alice Cooper's records. I love those early Alice Cooper records, but I don't know. It just doesn't seem to.
Went a bit too far, perhaps.
It hasn't got the magic to it that and then the next thing, the 80s stuff. It's not. It's better than I remember it being actually when I go back to it now. The live band wasn't for me. It was a very different sort of live thing, wasn't it? With the all the backing vocalists and that percussion bloke dancing around. And
what was particularly funny about the sort of the Gilmour-led Floyd that resurged with A Momentary Lapse of Reason was that, again, when I first heard the record, I burst out laughing because it just had all the Floyd tropes.
It ticked all the boxes, didn't it?
Yeah, it was kind of stick all that sort of stuff into it. And that album, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, I think it was originally intended to be a David Gilmour solo record.
Right.
But it sort of became Pink Floyd when he started collaborating with Nick Mason, and then they brought Rick Wright in at a fairly sort of late stage. He wasn't a full member of the band again when they released that first record. But of course, they then toured it and played it alongside a whole host of Pink Floyd stuff, and then released The Division Bell, which
that's got its moment.
Is considered to be a much better record.
Yeah, another one I haven't really gone down the road of very much, to be honest. I think I might have heard it once, but
I never.
Production dates.
I don't like the production on those records. It's too modern, sort of late 80s, early 90s type of.
But
brittle.
It sounds more dated than the records of the 70s, doesn't it? It hasn't got the warmth to it. It's got the big synth sounds.
All that sort of stuff.
It's kind of got bigger synth sounds, but they just don't. Everything's so compressed and so.
Yes.
It's just very flat, isn't it?
It is. And I mean, it's interesting that when they toured it, they chose to do things like perform the whole of the Dark Side of the Moon at some of the gigs.
That's cool, though. I love seeing that.
So it's clear what the fans wanted, and they knew what the fans wanted.
But conversely, once all the pressure was off, Gilmour did that live in Gdansk album, and that sounds like Pink Floyd. It sounds.
That's brilliant. Yeah, once he'd started, basically sort of restarted his solo career.
And the last few solo records he's done really good as well. That On an Island's really good. I mean, there's all those records sound like Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd, just doing Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd. Really,
I saw him on the last tour that he did, the most recent one.
I'd love to. Brilliant.
And I mean that was tremendous. It was at the Royal Albert Hall, and of course he did. The second half was essentially a Pink Floyd's greatest hits, and he cracked out songs. He did Astronomy Domine. He did Fat Old Sun. Large sort of swathes of Wish You Were Here and Dark Side, Comfortably Numb, of course, Run Like Hell. So it was a real sort of Floyd greatest hit show, and it was tremendous.
Going back to Steve Wilson, Run Like Hell, right? Voyage 34 is just it's the same song again, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
It's like, no offense to Stephen, I'm sure he's not watching. I'm sure he's not bothered, but it's like it's not only just like the same riff, though, isn't it, Stephen? I mean, but there was no one in the room to say, it sounds really good, and it sounded really good when Pink Floyd did it, 1972. But not sure
what happens when people self-produce.
I don't get anyone to say, "Oi, mate, that's the same riff as the other one."
Yeah.
But yeah, so overall, I think that run of 5 Floyd records is.
Those are the ones for me. All the 70s stuff.
I don't think I don't get the impression when they were making those albums and being in that band, any of them were very happy.
No, I don't think they made any of them happy.
I don't think anyone in that band was having a lovely time.
No.
And it was the sort of process of, Meadow through to Animals, and then sort of 4 unhappy men in the room.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's sort of epitomised. If you look at the photograph of them on the inside gatefold of Meadow,
yeah,
you've got 4 blokes who look as if they probably haven't had a shower for a week. and they just look really very fed up.
And
I think
they're not speaking.
They spent the rest of the 70s feeling very, very fed up.
And so obviously, and it didn't get any better, did it? It just got worse and worse and worse. And and there's no, but there's a magic to the four of them playing together in that, there's in a way that only really the Beatles and, the Wetting Era Crimson or the Mad Vision Orchestra. There's not many bands that. There's that video of them doing the Live 8 performance.
Yes,
makes me cry. I can't watch it because it's just so good.
Yeah,
they were, and you watch that and you think, well, yeah, they were that good. They were, and there's not Crosby, Stills and Nash maybe were that good. You know what I mean? There was a magic to those four people standing on that stage that was greater than any of those as an individual. And
the sum of the parts, yeah.
And that none of them could explain, and none of them. And to be honest, I think it annoyed all of them. They had to have each other there to be able to make that sound.
Yeah, because I've seen Roger Waters solo, and it was all right. Yeah, he had Eric Clapton on guitar on that tour.
I've never wanted to see Roger Waters solo.
It was, again, he did.
I mind seeing those Wall shows. I bet the Wall show is quite good, but once again, it's not like I've ever stuck the Wall album on for fun. I think I listened to it once or twice, and it was never a fun record to listen to. And I think
there's no real joy in it for me these days, I have to say.
I'm not going to make myself listen to the Wall, but I'd like to. I bet it's a good show.
Yeah.
But it's just a shame because all the joy I've got from these records and millions of other people around the world have got from these records, but it seems to have brought no joy to the four men that made them.
No, none whatsoever.
Doesn't seem to have made, they always seem to have lives that they don't seem like very cheery guys, do they, really?
No, they're not at all happy.
And
but there we are.
It's a very strange band, very strange. It's a sort of band you can't imagine how they became that popular.
No.
And also, I will say, is within the contemporary progressive rock world, how much of people rip them off?
Oh, totally. Although, interestingly, I don't think about them as a progressive rock band.
No, more space blues, isn't it?
Yeah, they're not. They don't seem to be coming from the same place.
No, they're not symphonic rock at all.
I can't really sort of articulate it any better than.
Well, because there's not a lot of classical in there, is there?
No, none at all.
There's blues, there's space music, there's avant-garde stuff, psychedelic pop stuff. So there's a little bit of in Rick Wright's playing. There's a lot of Miles Davis chord inversions and stuff, and a lot of Milesy stuff. But I wouldn't say there's a great classical influence in Floyd. Maybe structurally in terms of the way that the longer pieces and stuff, but compared to where someone like Crimson or Yes or ELP, it was all very, very classical orientated, wasn't it? And there was, I mean, I'd always argue there's, the music that's generally called progressive rock is in fact symphonic rock. That's what it is. It's rock with classical bits in it.
Certainly, if you're talking about the 70s stuff.
It's the classical. And I think a lot of the problems we've got with now what people call progressive rock is that perhaps it had the wrong name in the first place, but I'm not going to sit here and argue about what is.
There have been more sort of cycles on the internet discussing that very topic than
there are whole Facebook groups that with thousands of people in. I'm not going to mention them, but there are whole Facebook groups that their main role is to say what is and isn't progressive rock.
No, it's
like
just,
the Daily Mail, what it doesn't and does give you cancer.
There are people the chance to argue about it, basically.
So I'm not going down that road. David, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Matt.
I'm going to switch off.
Bye for now.
Everybody. Thank you for watching.